Great. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this panel today on sports at US universities. We're going to be talking about sports scholarships and everything to do with sports at college in America. And I'm really pleased to have with me a number of panelists here who are experts on this matter. So without further ado, I'm going to go through alphabetical order and get everyone to introduce themselves, starting off with Holly from Aspire USA. Holly, welcome.
Hi there. Hi, everybody. My name is Holly Cram. I am a former GB and Scotland hockey player. I've got over 150 caps for my country. I was fortunate enough to play in the US. I played at the University of Richmond in Virginia, which is a D1 school, and was an All-American and a recent inductee into the Hall of Fame at the university. I retired after the Commonwealth Games in 2014, and I'm a teacher by trade, so my background is actually teaching. But I set up Aspire USA about 4 years ago now, to help other athletes experience the incredible opportunities and life-changing opportunity it was for me in the end, to help them access those opportunities. So we work with a number of different sports, and across a number of different universities from D1 all the way down to junior college. So that's us, Aspire USA. I'll pop the website link on the chat bit at the end.
Brilliant. Thanks, Holly. And next we have Gerry. Gerry works for NFL, which I'm sure you've all heard of, and he is currently based in London. Gerry, do you want to explain who you are, what you do for the NFL, and how you work with students in the UK?
Okay, hi. My name's Gerry Anderson. I've been involved in American football in UK and Europe for over 30 years, having played professionally for the London Monarchs in the World League and been working with the NFL for approximately 20 years, initially setting up their community development programs and currently working with the NFL Academy that's based at Barnet and Southgate College, which is based on the US college system where the kids have to attend their lessons, like and study, as well as practice football 3 times a week.
Brilliant. Thanks, Gerry. And we have Mark joining us from Dartmouth College. Mark.
Hi. As Jason said, my name is Mark. I am originally from Ireland. I moved to the US in 2013. And over the last 7 years, I've worked at 3 different academic institutions here in the US. So I worked at Longwood University for 2 years, which is an NCAA Division I program at a small liberal arts college in Virginia. Then at the College of William and Mary, which was the 2nd oldest school in the nation, which was in Williamsburg, Virginia, for 5 years. And as of March of this year, I've started working as the head coach at Dartmouth College in Hanover, New Hampshire, which is an Ivy League institution in the Northeast. So hopefully today I can give you some insights into the differences between scholarship and non-scholarship processes within the world of college athletics. And having been here for as long as I have, I just love any opportunity I have to share whatever insights I can into helping people make that jump from Europe over to the US, because it's an incredible approach to education and athletics that's offered over here.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mark. And last but not least, we have Rob Thomas from Sporting Elite USA.
Yeah, I'm Rob Thomas. I used to play soccer at Wimbledon Academy when I was younger. Got released and didn't really know what I was going to do. Decided to go traveling and stumbled upon US universities on my first stop in LA. Long story short, ended up going to a junior college in America and loved my experience there. No one told me about American universities, sports scholarships, etc. at school. So when I got back, I wanted to get involved and make more students aware of the amazing opportunities out there. The amount of times I'd spoke to people and about the US and they don't think they're good enough, that you have to be a GB or an England international to get out there, and depending on the sport that's not always the case. So it's just what we do is we help students through the process, similar to with Holly, and just open up as many options for them as they can and making it affordable at the same time.
Brilliant, thanks. Right, well, we don't yet have any questions in the Q&A. Just a reminder to everyone who's attending, feel free to put any questions, no matter how silly you think they are, in the Q&A function on Zoom, and we'll get those answered. But I've got some questions prepared. Some people very kindly sent over questions in advance. So I'm going to start off with the big question, which is, how do you get a sports scholarship? Now, I know that's very different depending on where you're going, but Rob, I know you've just finished talking, but since your mouth is warmed up, would you like to try and answer that question? How do you get a sports scholarship in America?
Well, it varies from sport to sport, that's for sure, depending what time you start. And my advice to everyone is, as soon as you know the US is a route you want to go down, get started. Don't wait. I know in the UK, people tend to start after GCSEs, and for some sports it's already too late, or you've lost a lot of opportunities. So again, if you're looking at a team sport like rugby, field hockey, soccer, American football, video footage is extremely important. You want to be able to show coaches why they should be recruiting you instead of someone else from around the world. So that's always a good starting block, getting some video, making a highlight reel. And yeah, get going early. Don't think that academics don't play a big part. A lot of athletes have come down the line over the years that didn't realize that how big of an impact GCSEs, A-levels, BTEC, whatever it may be, how that will impact it. As I'm sure Mark will be able to explain a bit later on, academics can make people like Mark and other coaches' lives much easier through the admissions process and dividing funding, getting other areas of funding. So yeah, I could talk about that for very long, but I guess that would be the main things I would want to say on that before everyone else wants to add to that.
Well, I know you mentioned Mark there a few times, but Gerry, obviously you work with students at an academy where those students have to do their lessons as well. Do you want to say a few words about students trying to get through the academic side as well as the sporting side?
I think one of the challenges is that also you have to basically do the right subjects to make sure you are in line with whichever institution you want to go to, because it's not just good enough to do your GCSEs, it's what subjects do you do that will actually give you access to different types of colleges in the US. So when you come to the academy, we try and look at what gives you that opportunity, or the best opportunity to get access to go to college in the States, be it NCAA, NAIA, whichever it falls in. We try and make sure that we fit you with the right courses, and then the rest is up to you, because they do go hand in hand. The playing the sports side as well as the studying side.
Great. Thanks, Gerry. And Mark, obviously at the moment you work at a fairly academic institution, and you've worked at several others as well. Do you want to say a few words about what sort of academic level students might need to be at, depending on which colleges they're thinking about getting a sports scholarship at?
I think there's a couple of bits to that question. I think the first is that just like where you are in the world right now, because I know not everyone on the call is from England, there are different tiers of academics available at different institutions across the US. And as you go through your secondary school education, you're going to have a feel for, am I a straight A student? Am I someone who, like me, gets B's and C's? Or is school a little bit more challenging? And that's a factor in your decision. But with the majority of sports, I know the sport I work with, it's offered at 78 Division I institutions, something like 300 Division III institutions, and a bunch of Division II institutions. And Gerry mentioned that there's also the NAIA in a number of sports. I think if you know that America is where you want to go, there's going to be a school that might be a good fit for you academically. And then it's whether or not athletically it's a good fit for you as well. And as you start down this process and this journey, having a look at the possibility of taking a standardized test early so that you can get a feel for where am I roughly going to fall on an SAT or an ACT. And then you can compare those numbers to the admission standards at the institutions you're looking at. If you're looking at an Ivy League school, you're probably looking for an ACT score that starts with a 3. And if your ACT is coming in at a 20, well, then you're thinking, hey, maybe I need to look elsewhere. But that doesn't mean that America isn't an option. It's just a matter of finding the right school for you, the same way that it is in any country in the world. The difference over here is that you apply to the institution rather than to the course specifically that you want to study. So you find the school that you like, make sure it has the subjects you're into, and then you go and you try and get into the school and then try to specialize and pursue the major that you're interested in. But what I would say is that there is a school for everybody. And if you look into this process properly, you should be able to find a school that will be a good fit for you. And then whether or not there is the opportunity to play sports at the school, that's a conversation that you have with the coaching staff at that particular institution.
Okay, great. Holly, here's a question for you. We've talked about the academic side of things, but the other big question, of course, that people always have when they talk about sports scholarships is, what level do they need to be at? Like, how good have they got to be? And obviously the answer to this depends on what sport they're going for. But when you get asked that question, Holly, what do you say to people?
Well, there's two types of sport for me. There's objective and subjective. So an objective sport is something that has a distance of time. It's easy to identify what level that you're at, because all the scores, the times, the distances are published at NCAA Division 1, 2, 3. So if you're a swimmer, then you will have a time. You can gauge your time against the PBs in Div 1, Div 2, Div 3, NAIA, junior college. So it's easier to do it that way. The problems or the difficulties arise in subjective sports. So that is, you're relying on somebody's opinion of you. So whether you're a hockey player, a footballer, a rugby player, you are relying on somebody's opinion. Now, Mark might want something in a hockey player that's completely different to Princeton. Coaches have different preferences. So it's about then getting somebody who understands the sports to give you an evaluation, to say, okay, listen, these are your skills, these are your strengths, this is where I think you would fit in the US. I tend to not go on CVs because, you know, different governing bodies in England and in the UK and in Europe have different systems and different routes. So somebody may have been missed on the system, but it's actually a really good player. So don't worry too much if you don't have the England on your CV or a performance center. If you are a good player, then try and get somebody to look at you. That may be, if you're going through an agency, that may be one of us. So Rob and I would look at your video and be able to make an assessment. Or even to a coach in America, if you want to try and do this process yourself and not use an agency, then perhaps there's an opportunity for you to actually say to a coach, listen, this is some video that I've made. What do you think? And if they've got time to reply, then they might be able to give you a good gauge of where you're at. So it depends on the sport, and it depends if it's a subjective or objective sport. But do your research. It's very easy to find times, distances on ncaa.com. It's easy. Subjective sports, try and get footage, try and get somebody who knows the sport to come along and watch you play and give you an idea roughly where you're at.
Great, thanks, Holly. Okay, we're going to answer a question that was both emailed to me and has come up a couple of times in the questions already, and that is related to the academic side of things. There is this dreaded testing side of things when it comes to sports scholarships. Obviously, that is much more pertinent this year because of the difficulties people have had getting tests. So first of all, what would you say to someone, Mark, if they hadn't had the opportunity to do the tests when they normally would have done?
I think the first thing is that whatever situation you're in, you're not the only person who's in that situation. This past week, I've been doing, or the past number of weeks, we've been doing a number of virtual visits at the institution that I work at. And the amount of individuals who said, I've tried to go to testing centers, we've gotten to the test, we didn't even know it wasn't going to happen, and it's been canceled. So you're not alone if you are in that situation. And then make sure that you're making every effort that you can to do those things. Now, your standardized test is a piece of the puzzle, but it's not the only piece of the puzzle when it comes to a coach assessing you from an academic standpoint. And depending on the academic rigor of the institution, the value of that test differs. At some schools, they're test optional, and at other schools, it's an absolute necessity. So do everything you can to make sure that your transcript, so that your grades from your high school are showing who you are as a student as well. So if your school has a breakdown of how many people are getting what grades. So if you're getting all A's and only 3 students out of the 180 in your class are getting all A's, see if you can get that information from your school counselor as well, because that will show how you do in your school relative to your peers. That may be just as important to an admissions department as your standardized test score, or even more important, because how you do in school on a day-to-day basis, that's what we're going to deal with when you come to college. you're going to be going day to day. It's not that you're going to rock up for an SAT or rock up for an ACT, turn around and go home, and then we won't do it again for another 12 months. You're going to have to go to school every day. So if you haven't had the opportunity to get a test, I would start to try and take online practice tests, and then find a way to share those scores so that you can give the colleges an idea that, hey, I've done 2 or 3 practice tests. My scores have been between these ranges. So I'm hopeful that when I take a real test, that's where I'll end up. Show them what your transcripts say about you as a student, and then make sure that you're doing everything you can to translate your transcript. Because most people who sit in my chair aren't familiar with the academic level or the different academic programs around the world. Every time I get a transcript from another country, I'm like, man, now I have to sit down and figure out what is a high level in this school and what is a regular level. So make sure that you're showing if you're taking ordinary level or advanced level courses and how you're doing in those more challenging courses.
Great, thank you so much, Mark. That's a really interesting point you made about doing a practice test or mock test and then showing the scores and saying, look, I've got some evidence that this is what I'm capable of. Rob, you and I have had a few discussions about testing, of course, with various students, because if you're not in year 13, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, if you're not in year 13, then the NCAA is still expecting students to take tests, is that right?
Yeah, so they said for 2021, you don't need to do the test for 2021, but after that, yes, they have. There's not been an announcement yet, anyway. It's a bit of the unknown, but it's very likely I would be planning on doing the test if you're gone past that. And either way, as we spoken about previously, Jason, not every university has gone test optional. Some universities do still require the SAT or ACT test. So why limit your options when you can have all of them to potentially choose from? And even the ones that have gone test optional, it's another way of separating yourselves from other similar level students, maybe, that could get you some additional funding from the academic side. So I feel if you're an academic student and you want to find that a top tier academic university, then it's definitely worthwhile setting yourself apart, or an option of setting yourself apart. But yeah, not a necessity for anyone in year 13.
Okay, great, thanks. On the subject of academics again, Gerry, there is a question here that is directly at you. I think someone who knows you from a while ago, but this person has a son who is thinking about playing basketball in the States, and they're looking to play Division 1 basketball. They're an A-grade student. But the question here is specifically about should someone who's thinking about doing basketball go post GCSE, or is it better to go post A-level? What would be your answer to that? You're muted at the moment, Gerry.
I think the decision is a very personal one. I mean, I always believe in education first, because that's the thing you're going to fall back on, and you need to take in consideration that when you go to the US, if you go like post GCSEs, how does the topics or subjects you're going to study compare with your A levels, especially if you're very confident that you'll be successful in your A levels, because if your basketball path changes, you're going to have to fall back on your education. So you'd have to be very mindful of how they match up. And that's one of the conversations we have from parents in terms of taking the kids out of the academy fairly early to pursue football career via junior colleges, to make sure that it matches their goals and their beliefs from an education standpoint as well as from a football. It's very much a personal choice.
Great, thanks, Gerry. And I really like what you said about thinking about academics first, because no matter how good you are at sports, you never know what's going to happen, and therefore having an education to fall back on is always a good idea. Yeah. I appreciate that. Yeah,
and it's also easy for everyone wants to play like NBA, NFL, or be a Premier League. They all think elite level, but they also need to understand that not everyone makes it. Very few make it. So what's the next? And the education is the backup.
Yeah, exactly.
I would throw onto that too, Jason, just an awareness of where that individual is from a developmental standpoint.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a lot of maturing that happens between finishing your GCSEs and finishing your A levels. And if you're going to make this journey of thousands of miles and live on the other side of the Atlantic, are you ready? Are you mature enough to make that jump yet? And that is very much an individual decision.
I agree.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to pivot slightly into a question which I think is going to take us on to a discussion about finances, because obviously one of the reasons that people think about getting a sports scholarship is that it will hopefully make it more affordable to go to college in the United States or elsewhere. To enable us to pivot onto that conversation, Mark, I want to ask you specifically about Ivy League colleges, because you're working at an Ivy League college now, and Ivy League colleges don't give scholarships per se. Can you explain a bit about that and how it works with funding at Ivy League colleges?
Sure. So the Ivy League model is such that they want to make sure that if you are an applicant to and you're accepted to an Ivy League school, that finances aren't a big factor in your decision-making process as to where you want to go to school. So the 8 Ivy League schools operate off the same financial model, which is different to other Division I schools. Our financial model is all based on need-based financial aid. So what happens is that as you apply to the school, you can start on any of the Ivy League schools, and you can do this at any point, but it is more challenging for international students to do an online calculator to see how much financial aid the school believes that your family is deserving of relative to their situation. So their mindset is, if you are academically strong enough to attend an Ivy League school, they don't want finances to be preventative to you doing that. Now, when it comes to an athletic standpoint, that means that we go through the same process as everybody else. We go out and we identify as much talent as we can. We look for the best players that we can who fit our academic requirements at the school. And then rather than being able to offer scholarships, we're able to offer our support to their application process. And then we can aid them in their application. Then the financial side of things is discussed between them and the financial aid department at the school. And at that stage, then the family makes a decision as to whether or not it's financially viable for them or not. That's obviously quite different to the rest of the NCAA, where depending on the level that you're competing at, you have access to more or less athletics-based scholarships.
Great, thanks, Mark. Okay, now we're talking about finance. Holly, do you want to talk a little bit about what sort of levels of finance that students might be able to expect, and how that differs between different colleges and sports?
Yeah, so the short answer is, the better you are, the more likely you are to get a higher percentage of scholarship. Just to add a caveat to that is, if you look at a sport I know well, hockey, as Mark said, there's currently 78 Division I programs that offer field hockey just now. You might look at the rankings and think, well, I want to go to UNC, top team in the US right now. Sorry, Mark, you'll get there, and you'll get there soon. Are you going to be a full ride athlete there? Probably not. You're going to have to be exceptional, one of the best players in England, in order to be a full scholarship there. You might be able to walk on and get no scholarship. If you were to look further down the rankings, you would probably be making more of an impact as a player. So therefore, you're more likely to get a higher percentage of scholarship. So it's really worth keeping that in mind, is if you are looking for a considerable scholarship, then you may not be looking at the top 20 universities in the US. You might have to be looking below that. But coaches, this is their full-time job. They know what they're looking for. They will still want good players no matter what level they are. So the better the player that you are, the more likely you are to get a higher percentage of scholarship. What is available, though, and to keep in mind as well, is you can stack scholarships. So if a coach says, well, listen, I've only got 50% scholarship for this year, but if academically you are strong for that university, there may be opportunities to pick up an extra few thousand, sometimes considerably more than that, on academic scholarships. So it's a different conversation for every individual. Some families have budgets that are more flexible, other families have budgets that are tight. And this comes back to the very beginning bit, is, am I good enough? Well, yes, you could be good enough somewhere. It's just finding that person that's going to say, okay, this is where your level is according to your budget, for example. So yeah, I think that's probably answered it. Division 1 is different from Division 2, and obviously Division 3 and NCAA have no sports scholarships, so it's similar to an Ivy League model. Division 2, they tend to have fewer scholarships, so you might be asked to contribute more in Division 2. Again, if it's a subjective sport, you're looking at the opinion of the coach, so it's better to have a wide variety of a short list, so you can actually have an opportunity to market yourself to a wide range of coaches. They might see different things in you. So the better you are at your sport, the more likely you are to access higher levels of funding. Oh, and actually, sorry, Jason, just one more thing to that is, and I can't believe I almost forgot this, is there was an amazing thing in the US called Title IX, which is really cool for female athletes, because basically, in a nutshell, what that is any money that's invested into men's sport has to be equally matched into the women's sport. So quite often, there are more female sports available that are offered by the university, or there could be more funding for females. So being a female in America is a very, very good opportunity, because there may be more scholarship money for females than males generally.
Great, thanks, Holly. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because it is really good for female athletes. Talking about the different levels of finance, different colleges, and finding the right place for you. Rob, you mentioned about how you went to a junior college when you were in the States, and had a question here from someone who's asked about under what circumstances might you consider a junior college or a community college? Do you want to answer that?
Yeah, it's that will differ from person to person, obviously. Like we touched upon earlier, it's a certain person's circumstances. It could be that you haven't been able to get the exposure to, you started the process late and you haven't been able to get out to coaches early enough, and the funding's gone. Where you go to a junior college route, it's a cheaper option most of the time. So it does give you that opportunity to get your foot in the door and to get noticed. So you could have a year or two at junior college, put yourself in the shop window, sort of, and then transfer for your year 3 and 4, or 2, 3 and 4, depending on how that first year goes, to an NCAA D1, D2 university on scholarship funding. It might be that you had offers and you did start early and you had offers from Division 1 and D2 unis, but the offers weren't within the budget that you had to work with. So again, you might look at junior college. And lastly, academics. You might be academically ineligible for NCAA D1, D2 as a freshman student. So again, you could look at the junior college route, get your foot in the door that way, pick up your GPA. The transfer rules are ever so slightly different to incoming freshmen. So that are options for people to look at. So some of the junior colleges out in America, again, people look down on them, but some of them are really great places. You know, I wouldn't change my experience there. They're not down and out places or anything like that. Some of the opportunities are really worthwhile exploring for certain people. So I always recommend to anyone, just have an open mind, look at it. If you don't like it, no problem. But you're not going to lose anything by exploring another option.
Great, thanks, Rob. Okay, we've got a question here, which I think I know what the answer will be from everyone. But the question is, if a student's in year 13 and thinks they might, listen to this, have a good shot at a sports scholarship, is it too late for that student to start the process now? Gerry, what would you say to that? Gerry, you just need to unmute yourself, sorry.
Okay, I would say it's never too late. You know, they've got to be prepared to work hard and take the disappointment that may come their way. I mean, you know, what Mark just said was great. It's about putting yourself, or Rob just said, sorry, it's about putting yourself in the shop window. So if you get an opportunity to go to the US college, be prepared to go. But as Mark said, it's being away from home is a challenge, but it's never too late.
Great.
Can I add just something on?
Yes, Rob. Yeah.
So yeah, like I touched upon, I'm pretty certain Holly mentioned it earlier as well. Like, yeah, the more time we have, the better, right? You're going to have more opportunities to explore. But if you're good, it depends how good you are as well. I've had students over the years. I had someone that got admitted to Cal Berkeley in May, and she started in September. But she was a GB level athlete. Lots of strings were pulled for her to get in within a few months, even though the international deadline for the application deadline for Cal Berkeley had gone, well gone. So it's never too late, but ideally, again, you're gonna start earlier because you'll just have more options.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. And I mean, Mark, speaking as someone who's in a college at the moment, when would it be too late? At what point is it just not possible if you're in the last year of school?
I think the challenge with all of this is that we want there to be one answer, but depending on the institution and how selective they are in their application process, that can be very different. I've worked at schools, just like what Rob said, where, you know, we could be in July squeezing someone in who's going to come and start preseason with us the following August because the school was trying to boost enrollment. Whereas I've also worked at schools where we could be in May and they'd be saying, no, look, regular decision, the deadline was in February, we can't do it. So I think it just depends on the schools that you're looking at. And then the other piece is that if you do end up speaking to a school and they're really excited about you as a prospect, but they're not in a situation where they can support you as an applicant, they might ask you whether you'd be willing to enroll in the spring or the following year. And there's a lot of people around the world who really enjoy taking a gap year. Or if it's a situation where you don't have an abundance of scholarship available, maybe that's a great opportunity for you to go and get a part-time job, save up some money so that when you move to the US, you have a bit of pocket money or you're able to contribute to the finances as well. So in terms of when does it get to be too late, I think the absolute minimum threshold is probably the day that preseason starts for a school, and then working backwards from that date, depending on how selective that school is in their admissions process.
Okay, that makes sense. On that note, there's one thing that I want to ask about, which is that I know that the NCAA has some restrictions about what potential scholarship applicants can and can't do in terms of earning money and that sort of thing. Is there anything that people should be wary of if they're planning on taking a gap year in terms of competitions they might be doing and that sort of thing? Holly, do you want to answer that?
You were going to say, Holly, do you want to answer that? I was reading something else. Was the question the dangers of taking a gap year?
Yeah, so the danger of taking a gap year in terms of falling foul of any of the restrictions of the NCAA.
Yeah, so I had a situation with a girl who'd taken a second gap year, and because she had played competitive hockey, so she played more than 5 fixtures in her second gap year, that actually deemed her ineligible, and she had a full ride to D1 school on the table, which fell through, which was heartbreaking. We got her another scholarship. She's fine. She's doing really well. But yeah, it may be sport to sport that there may be things that come up competition wise that you have to be really aware of. But the first gap year generally is fine. What I would recommend from an athlete's point of view is that you don't just check out of your sport for a year and go and travel the world and bum around. A coach will want to see you making gains, advantages. So for example, this year I've had a couple of girls who have decided to take a gap year because of the current COVID situation, and so they've gone abroad. One's gone to Holland and one's gone to Australia to continue their season and to play. Now that to coach is very appealing. So it can be very advantageous, especially if you're in year 13 or you're coming to this process late. More than likely the scholarship money is going to be gone unless something falls through, there's an injury or an international player doesn't commit. So I'm a big fan of the gap year. Also, if you're young for your year, then it just buys you an extra year to grow and develop. It's a big thing to go abroad and live away from home. And the demands of a US college, particularly at that top end of Division 1, it's tough, it's hard going. If you feel like you need another year to mature, to work, as Mark said, to gather some extra money, I think it's actually a really good option, as long as you're continuing to train, you're keeping fit, you're keeping your sport at a high level.
Okay, that's some good advice. Thank you. Okay, we've got a question here from a teacher who has asked what school counsellors can be doing to support students who are thinking about sports scholarships. So obviously many counsellors are well versed in US applications in general, but it starts to become a little bit more confusing when it comes to sports. But what sort of things should teachers or counsellors or advisors in school be thinking about? Mark, maybe do you want to answer that?
Sure. I think the first thing is the clearer a picture you can give of the individual as a whole person. Because as Holly mentioned, a lot of sports are, it's just our opinion that helps us to make those decisions. And generally coaches are looking to find out academically, is a student going to be able to be successful at the school? Athletically, are they going to be able to perform at a level that's going to aid us and help us raise the standard of our team? And then, are we going to enjoy being around this person? Are we going to be able to trust them? What kind of a human is coming in the door as well? Because while within most club environments where most people play their sport, your engagement with the coach is just at training, when you come into an NCAA setup or you come into an American college, your coach has oversight over your performance academically. If you get in trouble on campus, that reflects on the program. So they need to know what kind of a person is coming in, and they'll talk a lot about your character as a person. So if you're able to get references from people who work at your school, so your counselor would be great for helping to provide those. And then also showing maybe if there have been students from your school who have gone on to perform well at American institutions, that almost having hey, this is a good place for us to develop people to go into an American college, because the education system is different. When you take that first SAT or first ACT, you're going to walk out of it and be like, what is this? This is nothing like the exams I'm taking in school. And it's probably a lot more like the actual academic experience you'll have in America. So your counselor is uniquely positioned to be able to give insights into your performance as an academic, as to how well you'll manage that level and the challenge of an American institution, but also be able to give that day-to-day feel that is going to be really important for some coaches as they make their decisions. And then the final part is, in addition to that, you can help to steer and to guide. There's an institution in Ohio called Miami of Ohio. And I remember a friend of mine telling me the first time they went to play there that they thought they were going to Miami in Florida. So you may have more information about the schools and about where they are geographically, whether they're in a city or in a small town. And those kinds of things are going to be important for people as they decide where they want to go. Because when people think of America, we think of polar places, we think of the sunny West Coast, or we think of New York City. But a lot of the colleges and institutions you're going to be considering could be in the Midwest, they could be in Texas, they could be anywhere. And any more people who can give you advice as to what those places are really like, that's invaluable for people who are making those choices.
Can I also just add on that, Jason, in the UK, I think we have a tendency to look at higher education in year 12 and 13, and counsellors maybe are only having access to the upper, lower and upper 6. Whereas for us, for people like Rob and myself, if we can have these conversations, start having these conversations in year 10 and 11, even just to ignite interests, that makes it a much smoother process for us. That's not to say they have to decide when they're 14 or 15 years old that they have to do it, but at least plant the seed, at least identify talent in those year groups where they can come and get an assessment, or they can know where they are, because there could be great opportunities there, and perhaps they're just coming too late. So as a counsellor, if you've got talent, sporting talent in years 10 and 11, it's not too early to start having conversations. That's all it can be at that stage, is just conversations. But at least you're getting on the radar of certain people that can help and guide you at that point.
Gerry touched upon it right at the beginning as well, about subjects that you're taking at GCSE and A-level or BTEC. If you're not studying the right A-levels, you can rule out Ivy Leagues, you can rule out some of the University of California universities, because UCLA, for example, if your A-levels need to be core subjects, they won't accept BTEC either. If you're doing PE at A-level, you're not going to get admitted. even if you're a GB world record holder, a swimmer, or whatever it may be, it's not going to make a difference. So if you are considering that, you need to understand what sort of universities might be of interest to you in a dream scenario, your aspirational universities, and are your subject choices acceptable to get through the admission cycle. There's nothing worse than finding out further down the line.
Yeah, and that's one of the major challenges. You know, they just don't for them to grasp, you know, that whole process and being able to transcribe what they're studying now into a US format. That's one of the major challenges. So again, a counsellor would be good to help them with that.
Great, thanks. There's related to that, and I think the advice about starting those conversations and getting advice early is really good. One person has asked, at what point should you, and this is really a question for Holly and Rob here, when should you consider getting a consultant, external consultant involved, and when should they not bother, and how does someone make that decision, and are there any other alternatives to that?
Yeah, of course. You don't have to use an agency. You can do it yourself. You may have had a sibling that has been through the process and you have enough information to be able to do it yourself. You may be very techie and very good at filming. You may be able to do the video yourself. If you're exceptional, then it's, you know, you can get interest. I think where we add value, and Rob and I work in a very similar way, is to be able to actually find the right fit. So I've had situations where people have sat down, you know, amazingly talented athletes, and they've got their own short list, and they think they know where they want to go, and I know immediately it's not right for them for multiple reasons. And so bringing in somebody like myself or Rob, we can just give you a bit more insight and open your eyes. Okay, so you're saying Harvard and Princeton, but actually have you looked at Michigan, Duke? It may be smaller universities might suit your personality. It may be that if you're in a GB program and you're trying to get home 2-3 times a year to train and join squads, why would you be in California? It's, you know, it's the time difference, etc. So there's lots of different and multiple conversations that we have with individuals to say, well, listen, this could be the right fit. You might not have heard of this university, but can we put it on the table and we can have conversations? Also, what I find, and Rob, you might be able to speak to this as well, is people start and try the process themselves. They get so far and then they hit a brick wall. And then that's when maybe they come in and ask us, maybe in year 12, whereas sometimes I think, well, actually, if we'd had you a year ago, we could be much further down the line with this. So the answer is you don't need to use an agency. There are some really good ones, the ones that really add value. And there are some not so good ones. So make sure you do your homework, do your research, find out track records, etc. on agencies. Don't just pick the first one you speak to. But you can do it yourself. You do not have to use an agent. And credit to Mark. Mark gives a lot of time to people that will just email to him and say, well, actually, you know, am I good enough? Here's my footage. And Mark can say, well, no, you know, maybe you're nowhere near Division 1, but actually it might be Division 2 or Division 3 conversation. And again, that's something that we can help with. Once you get to the applications, the NCAA eligibility, it can be really time consuming and it can be really frustrating. You're banging your head against a brick wall. So having someone there just to help guide you through that can be really helpful as well.
I think Mark mentioned it earlier in terms of there's no one answer. You know, in terms of when you should start, depending on the sport, there are sort of preferred start dates for each sport in terms of whether you start in year 9, year 10, 11, going into sixth form. Yeah, everything that Holly mentioned, it's possible to do it on your own. It just comes down to how much time you have to commit to the process to do it yourself and how comfortable you feel and your family feel with doing that exploration themselves. If you are a talented athlete in a measurable sport, for example, like track and field, you'll likely get some Instagram or some Facebook messages from coaches introducing themselves because they found you online. And I've known of students that have gone forward with them, and that's great. But it's a matter of how many other options could you have got that might have been better fits, as Holly mentioned, as opposed to just taking the first place that comes up. When looking at things like the NCAA or SAT or ACT, there's a lot of terminology that we're not used to in the UK educational setup, like transcripts. Again, we've mentioned it a few times, but we don't produce them in the UK, and sometimes students just like, what am I doing? Where do I do that? Tasks that the NCAA require. It's just adding some value there. But yeah, I know lots of people that have done it on their own, and lots of people have used agencies. And anyone that's listening, work out what's right for you. Yeah, me and Holly, we're always happy to talk to people to sort of answer questions and to let them know of the opportunities before they make any commitment in a way. So yeah.
Great, thank you. And I just want to say on a personal note, there are a lot of agencies out there, and it can be very difficult to work out who it actually knows what they're talking about and has any integrity. The reason why I like Rob and Holly personally is because they tell people honestly what their chances are, and I know won't take people's money just to try and pretend they're going to get into somewhere when they have no hope at all. So put it simply, I like Holly and Rob because they say no to people. There's a question here which was a bit more particular, which is about languages. And I know that actually, Rob, you mentioned this a little bit earlier, because it's one of the requirements in some regards. There's actually, the question is directed at Mark, which is, do highly academic places like Dartmouth still value a GCSE language, or is it required?
Again, I think that this is something that you're going to have to talk about with each individual coach in each individual school. The application process to the US is quite unique. And whereas you could say, oh, you need this many GCSEs to get into that school in England, it's not the same over here. What they're going to look at an academically rigorous institution is the level of challenge that you're taking in your course load, and then how well you do at meeting the challenge. So if you're taking a language and it's at a very ordinary level, you're not taking it at a higher level, and everything else is at a higher level, well, then that might be a sign of concern to a college based just on how challenging you're able to manage. But what I would say is that, you know, as you start to choose your subjects, if you're working with an agent, talk to the agent and say, hey, which subject should I be taking? If you're not working with an agent and you know that you want to consider certain institutions, contact their admissions departments. They'll try and get back to you, or look online and see what info you can find. Because I will tell you that I do not know the firm answer to this question when it relates to any of the institutions I've worked at, but I'm not paid to know that. People at our institution are paid to know those things. And if you go on to the institutions that you're looking at and you look at their admission department, there should be somebody there who helps with international applicants, and who also, maybe there's a contact information that you can reach out to. And generally, people who work at these kinds of schools love the schools that they work at and want to help people make sure that they're setting themselves up for success and attempting to get there.
Great, thanks, Mark. Rob, I know you're going to answer the next question, but just on this particular question, I know that you've spoken to me before about language requirements. Do you want to expand on that a little bit? Oh, Rob, you're muted, sorry.
So it has a little bit more relaxed than what it used to be a couple of years ago. So it used to be you had to have, still do, but 16 core courses before to be eligible for the NCAA. Didn't necessarily have to be a language, it had to be certain subjects to meet them core courses. It has relaxed a bit now for international students, where if it's not compulsory in your country to study them subjects, then there are waivers available for you from the NCAA. If you have studied a language and failed it, that's a little bit different in terms of getting them waivers. But again, as Mark mentioned, some unis do have different criteria, so that potentially would be needed from a university perspective, but not necessarily from an NCAA perspective anymore if you haven't done it whatsoever.
Thank you. And I saw that you wanted to answer the very particular question about swimming. I think
Yeah, I'd started typing and then it became a long one, so I stopped. So swimming, any swimmers that are looking to go out, FINA points are a good starting point to have a look at whether you're of the standard that you need along with your academics. As you mentioned earlier, or Holly mentioned with Title IX, female swimmers don't need to be of the same level as a male swimmer to get as much funding as a rule. So anyone looking at FINA points, you really want to be female swimmers around about the 650 in at least 2 events. Male swimmers, again, you want to be around the same, but preferably going into the 700s, ideally by the time you finish year 12. That's a rough guide, again, depending on your budget, depending on your academics, them numbers can change ever so slightly, but and ideally you want at least 2 strong events or distances.
Great, thank you. Mark?
I might just pop back to the language question, if that's all right. I will say that taking a language in school can be really beneficial, not just in your application process. At a number of schools, if you've taken 4 years of a language in high school, then you can skip their language requirement when you get to college. So if you're somebody who's 2 or 3 years into a language course in high school and you're thinking, will I keep this going? I would encourage you to achieve 4 years in your schooling system, because that means you don't have to take that language when you get to college. So if you're finding Spanish difficult and you're like, well, I keep it going, and you think you can do relatively well, I would take it in secondary school rather than try and take that 4th year of college or 4th year of Spanish when you get to college.
Great, that's a great tip. Okay, we've got a few minutes left. So Gerry, I'm going to ask you this one, which is obviously this year is a very different year to any previous years that any of us have encountered. How have you noticed that has affected things in the sports world? In particular, what it means for teams like football teams at college this year and next year?
I think if we look at the UK format, we're just getting back to playing sport, American football, should I say, based on the government guidelines and accompanying with the BAFA, which is the governing body for American football in the UK. In the US, fortunately, colleges have been able to begin their seasons, and some of them haven't been able to complete or begin their season. It's a bit of a mix and match. So and if you look at the NFL, another level, yes, their season's going on, but due to the situation, they've had to move games. Crowds aren't back at all the stadiums, and those that are, it's like maximum 22% capacity. So it has a major impact on our sport. And when you look at talk to the athletes and the kids about who were hoping to go to college in the US next year, they're a bit up in arms or a bit unsure. But the message is keep pushing. We'll try and create some good film for you, so you can actually showcase your talents as best you can. I mean, it's a tough year it's a tough year for all sports, and everyone who's involved in trying to get out to college in the US. There are some indecisions, but my role is to make sure that they stay focused and prepare the best they can be, because it's not going to get any easier.
Great, thank you. And as you alluded to there, it's been a tough year for many other sports, and I've heard that there are a lot of sports that have just no longer have teams at various colleges. Does anyone want to talk a little bit about that?
I will, because it affected me a lot. Mark's laughing because he was a part of this, but when Stanford made their decision to cut 11 sports, that was a huge decision. To give you an idea, normally on an average Division I university will have between 19 and 20 sports that they offer a year. Stanford at that point were at 33, which was the most sports offered by any university in the US. Funding 33 sports is obviously massively expensive. And when we lose basketball, when we lose American football for a season, that hurts us not only in the millions, but probably the billions in terms of TV rights and whatnot. So the knock-on effect is actually there are sports that may struggle. I think it was Iowa that cut swimming as well, which was a big sport. It's not 100% safe. There are sports where are very unlikely to be cut, and perhaps the smaller sports, some coaches are, squeaky bum time, like Ferguson would say, that maybe are thinking, is my job safe? But I think there's a bit of fear mongering, and I think that the message from me is, a coach will have a decent sense of whether or not their program is on the edge or safe. And both Rob and I are we have conversations with coaches every day. We kind of know the programs that are safe and secure, and we would never put you in touch or speak to anyone who thought, well, a program's only got 1 or 2 years left of funding. So I think probably we felt the worst. ACC and Big Ten, as soon as these big conferences start to come back and play, that's going to help the smaller sports massively. So I would say I think we've probably been through the worst of it. If you are a small Olympic sport, then it's worth actually having that conversation with the coach. It's an awkward conversation, but if you're speaking to coaches and you're worried about it, just ask them. Say, listen, what's the landscape like for you? How do you feel as a program? Where are you at? And they'll generally give you an honest answer. I don't know if Mark or any of the guys, if you want to comment on that.
I think what we've seen is COVID-19 has exacerbated some of the financial aspects of Division I athletics across every realm of possibility. My laugh actually wasn't so much about anything to do with the situations Holly encountered, but the two institutions that I've worked at most recently, where I am now and where I was previously, have both suffered from the impacts of this. And I was thinking, Jeannie Mac, Jason, this is a very close to home question for me. Generally, it seems to be schools that have a large, diverse offering of sports. As Holly mentioned, Stanford were carrying sports in the 30s. A number of Ivy League schools have had to make similar cuts because they were carrying a broad portfolio of sports. And when the income doesn't match up with the expenditure, unfortunately, that's a factor in what comes next and how schools deal with making those decisions. I would say, as Holly said as well, be honest in your conversations. One thing that will do as an international prospect is it will show that you are aware of what's going on in the world of sport and you have a bit more of an understanding of the American sport landscape than most international prospects. Secondly, it will show that you're considerate, that you're thinking about this as a 4-year investment of your time, which is what all coaches want. Nobody wants you coming over for 6 months and then piecing out once Christmas arrives and you finished out your first season. So it shows that you're making commitment to that school. And thirdly, it is something that could have an impact on the availability of scholarship. But once you sign your NLI and you get admitted to a school, anything that happens at that point, any decision that a school makes, they are still required to honor your scholarship. So if you were admitted as a freshman, you start, and then halfway through your freshman year, they decide that they want to cancel your sport, your agreements with the school still stand. So they are still required to honor your scholarship for up to 4 years, unless you decide to try to transfer to another school. So if that situation does present itself during your 4-year experience, be very careful about how you proceed. And if you have used someone like Jason, Holly, or Rob to help you to make that transition to America, go back and lean on them again in those moments, because that's a moment that you're not going to be expecting, but they may have dealt with themselves in their experience so far.
Great, thanks, Mark. Really good tips there. Okay, we're pretty much at the end. There's a couple of very particular questions, and I'm going to just try and get through them very quickly. I think the first one I can probably answer myself. One is that this person says that they play basketball and was thinking about taking up American football. Is it worth playing 2 sports? Well, I think from getting a sports scholarship perspective, that's probably not going to help you, is splitting your time between 2 sports. But for your own life, if you enjoy playing 2 sports, then yes, do that. Having passions that you care about a lot is going to be good for your US applications in general. But if you are thinking in particular about a sports scholarship, obviously you'll need to achieve a level in one sport that you're looking for. The other question is a question that I must confess I don't quite understand. I'm hoping here someone does. What are your opinions on reclassification? Does anyone know what that means? Feel free to jump in if you do.
Nope.
No.
Okay.
I think that they mean retaking or going back and taking another class. So when people talk about a class, they mean their graduating class. So if they're in the class of 2021, that would be that they would be finishing school this academic year, and reclassification would be similar to a gap year, trying to get yourself into a situation where you are applying to school 12 months down the line. And the ways that people would do that would either be by taking what's called a postgraduate year, which would be going to another school to repeat your senior year at another institution, another high school, or repeating a year in their high school application process. My opinion is that that is something that you should only do if you think that it's going to have a positive impact on your academics and it's going to give you more time to talk to the schools that you're looking at. But I would also be aware that just with every other answer that I've given so far, talk to the coaches that you're interested in talking to, because it's been something that's been brought to my attention by a number of people, with people that I said I wasn't going to recruit for a particular year. And they said, well, if I reclassified, would you look at me for the following year? And in my mind, I'm thinking, if you're not good enough for me now, I don't know that you're going to be good enough for me in 12 months time when you're competing with a whole new fresh batch of recruits. So I think it's something that you have to look at from your development as a human. Are you mature enough to go to school? Academically, is it going to be of benefit to you? And is it actually going to increase your chances of getting recruited or admitted to schools that you're interested in? And have those honest conversations with the coaches you're looking at.
Brilliant. Well, thank you. I'm glad someone could answer that. If that wasn't the correct answer to your question, feel free to email us afterwards. That is all for today. All I want to say, first of all, is thank you very much to Mark, Holly, Rob, and Gerry for joining us today. I hope everyone found it very useful. I also just want to say we have plenty more events coming up, normally on Wednesdays. Next week, we are talking about something completely different, which is about Australia and New Zealand and universities therein. If you're interested in that, then why not join? I'm going to just put the link to our events page on the chat there, so feel free to follow that and look at the next events. But for now, thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you to the panelists again. And I hope that you all learned something useful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Take care.